In private equity, the number always gets diligenced, but the people running toward that number usually don't until the CEO turns over, the hot revenue hire blows up a working team, or the succession plan turns out to be a blank page. The questions that you sent us are all about that gap, what firms do before the deal and not after the crisis.
Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and I am joined today by my co-host, Scott Morris. He's a former CHRO with all the scar tissue to prove it, a man who was trying to learn how to fly until his instructor got tired of hearing pull up, terrain, and the founder of Propulsion AI.
Hi, Jackson.
I love that bit. Today, we also have a third person in the room. You remember her from a couple of weeks ago. She's the reason this format works. Rhiana Barr is a two-time Chief People Officer who now runs Pinnacle Peak HR as a fractional CHRO and executive coach. She was with us 2 weeks ago, and we are delighted to have her back. Welcome, Rhiana.
Thanks, Jackson. Hey, Scott.
But today, we have a third person in the room, and she's the reason the format works. Rhiana Barr is a two-time Chief People Officer who now works at Pinnacle Peak HR as a fractional CHRO and executive coach. And she was with us 2 weeks ago, and we are delighted to have her back because today's another listener question episode, and she's, like I said, back by popular demand. On her only appearance with us, we debuted at number 6 in the management podcast Apple rankings in Australia. Is that a coincidence? We're not willing to risk it. Rhiana, welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast.
Thanks, Jackson. Happy to be back. And thank you, listeners. All right. So before we get into these questions, I just have a quick reminder. I may have rewritten your questions for brevity, clarity, or just because I wanted to mess with Jackson or Scott. We'll see. Kidding. So we're going to start at the deal because that's where the talent conversation either happens or it doesn't. So to get us started, our first question is from David out of San Francisco. I've sat in 2 deal reviews this year where talent doesn't come up until the last 20 minutes. Both of these companies have since replaced their CEO. At what point does the PE industry admit that talent diligence is not optional? And what does a firm do to actually get this right? Scott, what does that look like?
Well, we make a product that helps them with that, but let me take, I think there's 2 parts of that question. At what point does the industry admit that there's a problem, and then what does it look like when they get it right? Bain tells us that 71% of exit value now comes from operational efficiencies. So leverage and margin arbitrage and financial engineering, they're not doing it anymore. And the gains, you have to get out of the workforce. But here's another fact. DPI, distributions of paid in capital, is at its lowest point, and I think it's like 6 or 7 years, which means that there's plenty of investment capital out there, but we're not growing the businesses fast enough to turn around and sell them. Bain also tells us the average hold period's gone from 5 to 7 years, which is exactly the point at which IRR starts to stagnate. So I think private equity can't ignore it anymore. And so I think my answer to that question is now. This is the point at which they're going to have to start to look at other levers, including the workforce. But when a CEO gets it right, when the workforce becomes the focus, obviously you've got growth. More significantly, you've got first-year returns that perform on model. And I think that's really the test that I would hold up.
This is actually one of the reasons I started building this company 10 years ago. And it was to address this very thing, because what normally happens is you select a CEO either because they're brand new to the organization they get brought in, or they're a carryover from the acquisition. And you build everything around that. At least many, if not most PE firms, they'll hire the CEO and they will defer all of the talent decisions below the CEO to the CEO, which is great as long as the CEO performs. But the data there says it's not a sure thing. And in fact, there was a Epson Fuller study that came out quite some time ago, but the numbers haven't really changed materially. That is something like 2/3 of all CEOs are replaced somewhere between month 6 and month 48. And so if you think about the implication to hold periods, that 2-year delay in making another change at the CEO level sure looks close to that 2-year delay and hold period. And so one of the things that really strong private equity firms have started to do and do with a lot of rigor is not only just hire the CEO, but to have a very, very key involvement in the selection of the senior team and use all the diagnostic work that is available today on how to not only build the technical specialists, but create the enterprise cohesion around the mission. And more and more, I think that work is going to be pulled into the portfolio company as part of the diligence. And even the Bain 2026 operating review says that companies should start adding a talent operating partner to do that work. And that's certainly a necessary next step. I think it's insufficient. I think that's where the elevation of the CHRO in private equity starts to really take root.
So Jackson, you mentioned the CEO and also PE-backed firms. Our next question comes in from Confidential. So mysterious. I'm a first-time CEO at a PE-backed company. I'm 18 months into a 3 to 5 year hold and learning the sponsor relationship in real time. It's pretty clear that not every firm operates the same way. What do the best PE firms actually do different to set their CEOs up to win? What do you think?
Yeah, and if I were them, I would also be confidential with that kind of a question. So I totally get it. Like I think the best sponsors define success before the deal closes, which is all around the value creation thesis, and then tying it specifically to what it means for the leaders. And I think it then takes another step and talks about the pivotal decisions that are necessary in that first 6 to 12 months, because that's where literally the roadmap is laid down. And I think it's a make or break element of it. It's why it's so important to build your C-suite team and your pivotal roles in that time period. Because if you delay that, it just you're delaying the compounding effects of making those changes if necessary. So you got to really be clear about what the CEO owns versus what the sponsor drives and what the reporting cadence actually matters. It's weird. I've seen CEOs across multiple private equity companies have a whole different reporting and board approach to things. And a lot of it has to do with who's on the board and what the CEO prefers. But defining that cadence around the things that actually matter, I think is really important. Because what happens is if you like have shifting goalposts, it usually means that you weren't specific on the mandate. So it was like very, very generic conversation. We want to grow revenue. Even we want to grow revenue to this percent. Like the real conversation is 2 or 3 levels below. And you got to focus on that structure, not just the directional and aspiration.
That's great. So now let's get into one specific place where the relationship can break down, and that's the hot hire that everyone is chasing right now. So Amy from Los Angeles says, you hear a lot about CROs and revenue leadership being the hot hire right now in PE portfolios. But I've watched 3 companies blow up a perfectly good leadership team chasing a revenue leader who couldn't integrate. We've all been there. Is this just the shiny new object, or is there something real going on here? Scott, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the question that Amy has is really specific to the CRO, but I think the point that is underneath that question is a lot broader and super impactful, which is that before any hire gets made, there has to be a really thoughtful analysis of how the role is going to deliver value. And I think in the revenue case, it's like it feels really obvious, like you just need to grow revenue. But that's not always it. It's you need to grow profitable revenue and you need to grow the team that's able to deliver predictable revenue. And even at that sort of one tier down analysis that I just did, right? That's a different command over what you're looking for. And I think the best techniques in hiring, and Jackson and I had Lou Adler on, and I mean, I've been learning from Lou Adler for a long time, but I learned a lot in that episode. And one of the things that Lou was saying is you have to be really specific about what the factors are that connect to success. And then you can hire. So I don't think it really matters, Amy, whether it's a CRO or any other hire. The blow up, without knowing the details of it, the blow up might be related to the fact that you just didn't connect success factors to what you were looking for. And that means you got a bad roadmap. And that means you're probably going to make a bad hire. And so no wonder it blew up.
I've actually lived through at least 2 blowups, and maybe a couple of other, dumpster fires as well. And to your point, it's all about the context. A revenue leader in one context that could be a superstar might be, average in another, and actually work against the vision of what you're trying to do in a third. So for me, it's all about making sure that you're clear about the context and asking what specifically about the revenue motion needs to change, and be clear about the kind of experiences that you can then forecast would be successful in your context. Between sales folks and marketing folks, you have a wide variety of process discipline, and you have to really think about, do I need a specific process discipline? Because you can pull a very, very successful chief revenue officer or head of marketing out of one and find that they're a complete misfit to the organization you're trying to build with the disciplines that you're trying to make sure everyone is adhering to.
I think that's spot on. Spot on. So our next question comes from Kevin in Miami. We just ran a search for a portfolio company CEO and lost our top 2 candidates to companies where PE sponsors had a better reputation for how they treat their leaders. We've never had to compete on culture before. How much has the candidate market actually shifted? And is this permanent? Jackson, what do you think?
I don't know. Kevin, I think that's a really interesting question. One of the things that I think I've seen is in my time dealing and supporting private equity is there are varying kind of conditions of employment. And it really is tied to what kind of company portfolio you're trying to build. Is this a short hold, insert capital and let it grow rapidly and then turn it over to somebody who has kind of the deeper pockets? Those quick flips can be unbelievably profitable. The challenge comes when that quick flip doesn't, and now all of those things are kind of in a 3, 4, 5 year hold when you expect you to get rid of it, 18 to 24 months. I've lived year 2 in an environment like that. It gets really, really difficult. I've also worked in companies, and I think TPG is one of the great ones that I've worked with. And they take a look at what is it that the entire organization needs to be successful, and how do we, through our operations team, step in and try to help them unblock the things that are blocking them. Like, those are 2 completely different experiences. And by reputation, you have a pretty good idea who is who. And if you're a CEO with a proven track record in an environment where private equity is churning through CEOs, it's not surprising to me that you have the ability to pick where you want to work, and culture is as important to be able to execute in the next 10 years as it ever has been. And that leads to better financial outcomes too. Rhiana, you played in the space. I'm curious what you've seen.
I have played in this space, and I do think it's, an interesting question. I really would agree with what you're saying. I think culture's here to stay. I think that, different companies have reputations, and what may work for one candidate in your culture may not work for the next, and vice versa from a company's perspective. So I just think you need to be really thoughtful as you're making your selection.
Let me add just one thing really quickly to that, which is, and it harkens back to the question that Amy was asking. And I think the same dynamic applies here. At least I hear the same dynamic underneath, which is, if you're really clear about the kind of CEO that you need for the type of work that you're trying to do with the company, whether that's longer hold and development or shorter hold or whatever, right? If you're really clear about that, then the person you put in that role isn't going to perceive you as treating them poorly if you have a match there. But if you haven't defined that, that's when you have the potential for mismatch.
Yeah, I think that's right, which now will come up to my favorite idea ever. You guys, I'm sure, wish I had never gone to accounting school. But I think you need to audit your current portfolio and CEOs and get a sense, if you're a talent operating partner, kind of, are they getting a clear mandate? Do they get clear feedback? Are they getting support when it's necessary? Or is it one of those, the meetings will continue until morale improves? Both are out there. First step is to admit you have a problem, and then you can start working through those. but like information's available out there.
Jesse,
And
you know what? I think implicit in your point, CEOs are people too, and they are no different than every rank and file employee that works in a company. And you know what they need? I know you know the answer because you and I have done about 70 episodes on this. They need clarity. And if you deliver them clarity and the support to go out and do what you've asked them to do, then the rest of it, the environmental factors, I think probably subordinate.
yeah, and think about who you have the CEO candidates talking to. There are always people on your team that are better ambassadors to what you're trying to build than others. That really matters too. In most portfolio companies, you have a choice from a variety of firm resources who you have people talk to. That thing matters too, because to your point, Scott, you're right. Like, people are people. I think there was a song about that in the 90s.
Well, thanks, Kevin, for the question. Clearly sparked the conversation, so we appreciate it. The next question that we have is from Thomas in Seattle. We were acquired by a mid market PE firm, and we've started doing formal talent assessments post close. The data is useful. What I'm less clear on is what happens next. Specifically, who owns CEO succession and how do we structure the accountability? We talked about this last time without it becoming another thing nobody actually drives. Scott, what are your thoughts here?
So, I mean, I think first of all, if Thomas, if you are the CEO, I think you're given a huge gift, right? The fact that there was an investment in that kind of assessment. But I think my simple answer is the CEO has to own it. The CEO is accountable for the growth of that particular portfolio company. And so I think the best thing you do with that is grab onto it and utilize it. And think about principally, where are your blind spots? If that data, if that assessment didn't come with an executive coach, I think it's the opportunity to ask for an executive coach, somebody who can sit outside and hold the mirror up and, do what a basketball coach does, right? Coach isn't on the field or on the court. They're sitting off on the side saying, move your elbow in about 3 inches, and then you move your elbow in and you get a different result. And I think that's the same thing. So if you're the CEO, grab onto that. And that's how you actually drive it, where it's not a binder that goes on a shelf.
One thing that makes succession planning in private equity different is the time horizon involved. And a lot of times you have a process that, especially if you have a public company or a high infrastructure head of HR that comes in and they create a succession planning methodology that works great if you are trying to build over the next 30 years. And it matters not if you're trying to build over the next 18 months before a flip or you're 3 years away from a transaction. So one of the things that becomes really important is making sure, again, in the context, what are you solving for over what time horizon? I do believe it's the CEO's role. I would agree with you on that. That said, I think in my experience, boards and private equity have a increased governance role than they have historically applied. And by and large, we'll turn things over to the CEO. And I think Scott Bontempo was on and we had this conversation a few months ago. We turn over the CEO and the CEO kind of runs the rest and we take care of the CEO. And that is fine unless you have a problem with the CEO, which tends to happen in the majority now of hold times. So you got to come back and think about how do I match the human capital infrastructure to what matters to this business in this context on this timeline. And I think the real answer is, if I'm on the board, I want to go down to all of the pivotal roles in the top 2 layers of the organization, because in order for me to get out of the business what I need to get out of it over the time period I expect to have, I can't leave that to chance. And I think that's a huge opportunity as we move forward.
So, Jackson, on that topic, right, going down the next couple of layers, Andre from Atlanta writes in and says that C-suite succession is solid. Congratulations, Andre. That's awesome. But last quarter, his CEO is asking truly about that next layer, kind of VP, director pipeline. And he felt as though he didn't really have anything credible to share. What should he be tracking? Kind of what do those next steps look like?
So I'm not a big believer in succession planning below the C-suite. And before anyone kind of goes, oh my God, what are you talking about? I believe in talent portfolio optimization, which is you figure out what the roles that have an outsized influence on your business are. You evaluate who you have in the seats relative to the outcomes necessary to be a successful player in those roles. And then for those roles, you should always have an understanding of who would move into that role and a kind of balls and strikes assessment as to whether you're going to need to go to the outside. And that's where a lot of high altitude CHROs, they start knowing the people from the industry that they'd be able to pull in that and start nurturing those relationships. Succession planning tends to, from my experience, have no forcing function. We do the exercise, we put it on the shelf, and then we come back and we may pull it off the shelf in the event we have cause to use it, or we may not. In my experience, it's kind of hit or miss. But a talent portfolio optimization says, how do I get the best people in the roles that matter? And how do I have a balls and strikes, no BS way of looking at who is going to step into these roles? Because I've already identified them as the 5% that matter most. So I wouldn't look across the entire couple layers down. Looking at director and VP layers is I think a lot of work with no forcing function, and the opportunity cost is high. What I would do is look at the roles that matter, make sure I have a really good game plan, whether it's internal or external, for the roles that matter. And whether you're in private equity or in a public market, like that has the highest return on investment. And that's where I'd spend my time. And I would spend the time that you would do all of the directors and VPs. I would spend that time making sure that every role has an outcome tied to that role, and you can explain in very clear language why this role exists. That to me is a higher ROI than succession planning.
So, I hate succession planning kind of in the same way that you do, and for the same reason. I just don't, I think it is an interesting exercise and it goes on the shelf. We don't do anything. And so I heard that question differently, because the end of that question that Andre asked was, what should I have been tracking? And I think there are three things, Andre, that I would focus on. And you can spread this across, but like when you're looking at your leadership level, be focused on one, who are the people that truly understand how the business makes money? Do they just understand their subject matter? Do they really understand the bigger picture about how the organization makes money? Number two thing, who's delivering clarity to their employees about what they need? And the number three thing is, who's translating strategy? Some weird number, and I know I'm going to get this wrong, and I don't have an attribution for the source, but it's like in the 90 of employees that can't really tell you what their corporate strategy is. And it's because executive teams do a horrible job most of the time of translating strategy into something that actually makes sense when you're doing the work on the front line. So I would look for those three things. Do you know how the business makes money? Are you delivering clarity to your people? And can you translate the strategy in a way that your people really understand how they map into the...
So moving into what happens when your talent gets tapped too soon. Melissa from Charlotte has this concern. We promoted 3 VPs from director 6 months ago. 2 of them are struggling. We can't figure out why. Interesting. But they were their best directors. What are we not seeing on how to evaluate promotion readiness? Scott?
Well, Jackson and I did an episode on this, and it's,
Mhm.
I think the part that I recall vividly connected to this question is, I think our point was, being great at your current job is not the qualifier for the next job. The next job has its own requirements. And if you don't understand what those requirements are, you're not going to be able to assess the talent that goes into them. I don't know whether this was part of the question or not. I certainly heard it in my head as I was listening to it. I think we've got to stop using title promotion as a substitute for dollar promotion. Pay people fairly. Do a market study. Understand what equitable pay is and pay them fairly. Don't try and compensate for low pay with titles, which is a mistake that I see a lot of companies make, because then you get people with big titles who aren't truly ready to shoulder the accountability that comes with those titles.
Jackson, do you have anything for us on actual criteria? Something tangible we can give Melissa?
The solutions order is the path. Identify the 5 to 7 outcomes in a top grading methodology, use their scorecard. If you want to go all the way back to, I think, our first guest episode, we went in depth on that one with Chris Merceau. Figure out those 5 to 7 outcomes that if they do these things and only those things, they would be considered an A player in that role. A player is not tied to the person, it's tied to the role. And then evaluate the people that you're considering for those roles. And then make the hard call if the answer is none of these people are ready. So if you're like 0 for 3, what that tells me is you were probably too focused on the individual and their performance in a prior role rather than the criteria of success in the new one.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jackson, Laura from Austin writes in, and she says that you've talked about culture as decision residue. The idea that culture isn't what you say, it's the pattern of what you reward, tolerate, and punish. I buy that. So, my question is, if a PE firm acquires a company with a toxic culture, and the decisions that created the culture and the decision makers are still there, it's the same people, nothing's changed, how do you actually change it? Or do you change the people first?
So, so changing the culture without changing the decision makers, I think is possible. Also, me growing a full head of hair is possible, and my salt and pepper beard turning more pepper than salt is also possible. All three are unbelievably unlikely because, like when you have a toxic pattern running at the senior level, it is amplified through the balance of the organization, and it's what they reward, tolerate, punish, and if they're still being rewarded, then the pattern has no reason to change. And so I personally would start at the very, very top, and I would make sure that the decisions that are being made are supportive of the culture that you want. And that requires a decision audit, not a survey, not a sentiment. And then I think you also have to be really clear about the timelines and the outcomes, because the business reality like runs smack dab into your culture reality. And it would be great if I'm going to wipe out the entire C-suite at one time. I might also destroy the business in the process. And so, like, it's the sequence of the solutions order in that world that make a lot of difference too. And start at the top. Scott and I always kind of fight about, we put everything on the CEO. Like, this is one where even if you have people that are making decisions that drive dysfunction throughout the organization, like, at a minimum, the CEO has to set the standard for the way they want those decisions to be audited. And if you do that and then you make the change at the top, I think that's the only reasonable path to get there. You might get lucky, but it's pretty unlikely.
Our listeners are smarter than we are, but I want to double click on something because I want to make sure people don't misunderstand. And Jackson, if you don't agree with me, I hope we can debate this one out. Like, decision residue, I understand it conceptually, but it doesn't work as well for me as a very clear understanding of how you're expected to behave. That is culture. And so if you want people to behave in a certain way, for example, if you want people to innovate, if you want them to come up with new ideas, but every time somebody brings a new idea up in a meeting, everybody immediately goes to why the idea isn't going to work, what are you telling people? How are you conditioning them to behave in the organization? And the answer is, you're telling them don't bring up new ideas because everybody's going to tell you why they won't work. So if you want to change that, you have to change the incentive structure. You have to change what you're conditioning so that people understand clearly how they're supposed to behave. And I think that's a good first move. You may have to replace the people, but I think you start with, what signals are we sending? And there's only one place to look for that first, and that is the CEO and the executive team. Are we sending signals that condition the behaviors and make it clear how we want people to behave in this new world? And if you're not doing that, that's the first place. Then watch for a reaction. You're going to get to some leaders that you can't change them. Those are the ones you have to replace.
Scott, let me push back on that, because I think we're trying to get to the same place, and this might be a semantic difference, but when, how you want people to behave is in fact the outcome of decisions, because you can say
I don't dispute it.
Reinforce it, right?
I don't dispute it.
Yeah. So I think you and I are getting in the same place. I think the decision residue is one step earlier in the process, and it's okay if we kind of have a different way of going about it, because you're probably right. But I fundamentally believe that you can say anything you want, and you can set clarity around how we want people to behave. But
Well,
the
you have to do it with
impact
action.
of decisions is what either makes it stick or it doesn't.
Yeah. No, you and I are usually not that far apart on these things. My only point is, it's the outcome that you want. It's clarity about how you're expected to behave. Decision residue, decisions that you make, those are means to get to that end. And I'm just trying to.
And I think this is probably a good place to wrap it up, because this is, in fact, your Talent Sherpa summary. Because as Scott always says, like the best talent strategy is to put up a motivational poster and hope for the best.
All right, rapid fire summary. Here it is. And I think it's in 2 points. One, if you're a CEO, grab onto the data. Don't wait for the succession plan. You've got the ability to focus on the workforce. You've got the ability to focus on your blind spots, and that's what's going to lead you to faster and better growth. And 2, because we had a lot of hiring questions, focus on the success criteria. Use the top grading method. Make sure you've defined the key success factors for the particular role before you start thinking about hiring any role. Whether you are an operating partner thinking about CEO succession, or whether you are a CEO thinking about that one key hire that you have to make. That's my summary for this week. Rhiana, you had all the questions. How do you think I did?
You guys did fantastic. Thank you so much. I think that's spot on. I would say that great leadership isn't built by waiting until everything is clear. It's built by taking the next thoughtful decision, learning from it, and then continuing to grow. So thanks for joining us, and thanks to everyone who sent in amazing questions. We really enjoyed the conversation. Well, that's what we have for today, but we do have more questions in the queue. So let's do it again, guys. If you want to ask a question, please text in, send us fan mail, or even better, leave the question with a 5-star review wherever you get your shows. Thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, totally. That would be awesome. We should do this again. And again, thanks to everyone for joining us, especially you, Rhiana. And this is exactly how this show and this kind of an episode is supposed to work. And thanks to everyone who's listening. Please go find Rhiana at Pinnacle Peak HR and let her know that you heard about her on our podcast.
Yeah, agreed, Rhiana. Thank you so much. Second time, third time is going to be even better. We appreciate you keep coming out to do this with us.
And
truly my pleasure. Thank you both.
Yeah, and everyone, thanks so much for tuning into the Talent Sherpa podcast, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. This is, as we talked about, so much fun to do with and for all of y'all.
Hey, just one thing before everybody goes. Take just a moment right now and hit the like button on the episode, or even better yet, subscribe to the podcast. Our numbers that Jackson was talking about at the top of the episode, those numbers are growing. When we started this, we had no idea that anybody was going to listen to us, but we're obviously growing, and you can help that, not only helping us, but helping your fellow leaders in business by subscribing to the podcast. It helps spread the word to other senior leaders. So take a moment right now. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, we're on all of them. It would help us if you'd leave a review. It helps us a lot if you subscribe.
Yeah, unless it's not a 5-star review, at which point forget we said anything. And
no, we'll take a 2-star review. We don't want them, but those help us grow too. So we'll take those too.
I don't know if that helps us grow, brother, but I do want to talk about Scott's company, because that is a 5-star company. It's called Propulsion AI. It's workforce intelligence for private equity. Their AI teammates help surface workforce risk before the close, and even more important from my view, they help leadership teams drive execution after. They help you translate strategy into individual accountability and coach managers to define roles by outcomes and give every employee a clear line of sight as to what actually matters. I've been able to look behind the scenes and see what is getting built there, and it is really, really good stuff, all done through artificial intelligence. And you can learn more at the very cleverly named getpropulsion.ai.
Appreciate you, Jackson. And you know what? If you are a CHRO that's new to your role, or if you're aspiring, or if you're preparing to step into a new role, Jackson has built all of the tools that are going to help you operate at the altitude that new role demands. Remember, the head of HR role is not like the other HR roles. You need tools in order to do it. Personal coaching, the CHRO Ascent Academy, even his best-selling Substack, everything that you need is at mytalentsherpa.com.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Rhiana, and thanks to everyone who's listening. So until next time, keep raising the bar, focusing on clarity at the very beginning, and keep on climbing.